I'm going to cover 3 ways to spot a charlatan, and this video is going to feature our good friend Joel Seedman. He asked specifically who I thought were the worst coaches and why, and he put in parentheses Joel Seedman. So I'll take the opportunity to address Joel Seedman specifically. There aren't a ton of coaches who I hate outright or who I think are objectively bad that Joel Seedman is. He's this type to the nth degree, and that is the type of coach who is overly educated, overly technical, infuses jargon unnecessarily into every description, has long, complex, overly wordy explanations for what they do. Everything is novel. Everything is hyper functional. Everything is hyper varied. And a lot of the things that they portray coincidentally work out really, really good as marketing tactics. So when I see that, that's usually the first thing that makes me very skeptical. But you see a lot of this in like the strength and conditioning field anyways. You see a lot of people who are very gimmicky, and there hasn't really been innovation. There hasn't been anything new in recent decades. So as people are trying to fight all over each other to like stand out and build a brand, everybody ends up just grasping to whatever that new shiny object is that people have put out because they seem to be an expert or authority. If people prefer complexity over simplicity, you need to start small and build up over time as the topics get more complex. But as people favor complexity, especially endless complexity, you're talking about tons of variations, tons of convoluted methodologies. That is a very good sign that somebody is trying to sell you something and that the marketing is playing a role more so than, actually selling what best practices are or should be. So if you've never come across Joel Seedman, this is a guy that loves unique made up movements. They're almost always unilateral. They're almost always offset. And he always has just a very long, very drawn out explanation for why what he's doing is the best, why it's the most difficult. You can see that there is quite literally no limit. I mean, I think he just stands around in the gym all day and just plays until he comes up with a new way of doing the same thing. And every single variation he does is according to him, it's the best. According to him, it's the most brutal. And if you don't believe me, go to his Instagram, check out every single post. Here you have, offset feet. You have instability. He'll call it chaos, anti-chaos method, which just sounds stupid on the face of it. He does this one a lot where he's like hanging off the side, the impossible chest press. The most brutal chest press I have ever done. Everything is the most brutal. Everything's the hardest. So this is a good example because when it comes to getting athletes stronger, when it comes to getting people in shape, there are a few basic movement patterns, and the easiest, most straightforward way to get somebody from point A to point B is to get them good at it, have them practice it, and then progress it linearly in some fashion. And there's different methods of training organization that solve different problems, and they're all effective in some capacity. But I haven't seen a single thing about programming or training organization from Joel. I've seen specifically a hyperfixation on overly complex, convoluted movement patterns, and that leads me to believe. Go back to this one. Single leg bottoms up plate press, the hardest overhead press I've ever done. I mean, it's a meme at this point, how ridiculous it is. So anyways, this is somebody who hyperfixates on complexity. You see the same type of movement patterns, same principles, and for whatever it is that they do, that's apparently the only thing he's concerned with because he gets a lot of shit for all of the variations he does. And I've seen him respond multiple times and say that 80% of the movement selection he does is very standard movement selection, and that this is the 20%. This is a cherry on top. Now, I'd have infinitely more respect for him and his creativity if he was upfront with that, but he's not. He waits till he gets called out. Why is it that literally 100% of his Instagram content are these unique, offset, single leg, complex, convoluted movement patterns that he is overselling as being the most effective, the most brutal? That in and of itself, like here he's holding on to bands and doing a pull-up with his knees up. Challenging for sure. He highlights his clients. Many of them are NFL players. But that's like this very disingenuous way to try and take credit for something that you didn't do, because these guys were good by the time they got to him. And they're the best responders. He's pre-selecting for people that made it through high school, made it through college. And out of every buddy that trained, they did the best. They're the best responders. It's not like they were doing something different. They might have trained harder, but they certainly weren't training smarter through those years. So when you take those athletes and then you run them through whatever it is you're doing, and you're saying, here's, this tight end, here's this pro baseball player, whatever, that is like a roundabout way of taking credit for somebody's professional status that you did not contribute to. So I really take exception to that. I haven't seen anything about, this person sucked when they started and now they're winning bodybuilding shows. I haven't seen anything about this mediocre athlete is now somebody who got drafted. So I don't see results. I don't see validation or verification that his methods do what it is that he's claiming they do. And that's a big problem, because it'd be pretty easy. It'd be easy to substantiate. If you work with pro players for a long time, show their progress start to finish and show how it made their game better, show how they changed direction faster. But he's not showing any of that. And that's a huge problem. Charlatans and snake oil salesmen are always going to be extremely vague. They're always going to be convoluted and throw complexity at you. But they're also going to speak in this absolutist tone where everything is the best, everything is the most optimal. Because if you are in an authority position or a teaching position, it is absolutely your duty to communicate ideas effectively to the other person. You are the bridge in knowledge. People that go out of their way to bias towards jargon, to bias towards complex language, to speak over other people's heads. Like, here's a good example. This is the first one I clicked on. Simply, cleans and snatches are axial loaded movements with vertical force vectors. However, the hips, which happen to be the key muscles involved, function more in an antero-posterior hinging fashion. I don't know if that's a typo or if that's actually a word. Look, I went through physiology. I've been in this field for a long time. I can tell you that the mashing together, antero-posterior, I think he means anterior to posterior. I don't even know that that's a word. That's like a mashup of words. And he does that a lot. And an average person reading through this isn't going to know what this means. I kind of get what he's trying to say, but the way he goes about saying it is extremely obnoxious. It's not intuitive. It doesn't make this clear. And he does this for paragraphs and paragraphs. So much so that he has to go into the comments to finish his thoughts. Come up with all of these mystical, complex, magic movements. So as far as the marketing goes, I mean, his language is a big giveaway, but the complexity, the convoluted selection of movements, again, that's his only focus. It's not programming structures. It's entirely scattershot of just a million variations of the same basic things. And these all kind of do the same way. They load you in an unconventional way. Things are offset or they're unstable, and they bring in multiple parts of your body. I mean, it's like the McGill 3 on steroids. It's bracing with like anti-rotation or anti-flexion, and it's learning how to brace and resist movement in your spine under a load while you move your limbs. For decades, there hasn't been an innovation in training. There probably won't be until the far future, where we have nano robots that massage our muscles like the worms from Futurama. It's not that this stuff is without value. It absolutely has value. In fact, some of the movements I see, I'm like, if it wasn't so ridiculous, if maybe you made a couple modifications, it might be a useful way to progress some bracing component. If he's telling the truth and 80% of what he does is standardized stuff, then he might be doing all right with his athletes. But to everybody else, and this is a criticism I made of Louis Simmons and Westside, if you're doing one thing with your athletes, but you sold this brand to the public at large, you're on the hook for the disparity of what you do versus what you sell. And what he's selling is that what you need is an endless array of overly complicated movements because something functionality. And that's just a throwback to the lazy trainers of the 1990s that got their first Swiss balls and Bosu balls and didn't know what to do with them. So all of a sudden, everything turned into an unstable push-up or split squat. Thanks for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.